There's an important mantra in business is that happy staff equals happy customer equals happy bank manager. Are you with me? Surround yourself with influential people. Surround yourself with positive people. Surround yourself with people that give you objective reviews and constructive criticism. Interpret that. Look at yourself in the mirror. Okay? And a lot of leadership and leadership development comes from within.
What was the most difficult day at work for you?
Too many to mention.
The biggest one, what happened there? You woke up and then what happened?
Jeez.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode. Today we're chilling with someone who has wisdom, knowledge, and experience. Now this person, he joined the Sun International in 2014, where he onboarded more than 3,000 employees. Yes, 3,000 employees. That's how gangster he is, to say so, in business terms. And then he worked for the Nando's group for over 20 years, where he worked as the CEO of corporate assets. And he also worked as a director. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot to be said about this individual, but as usual, I want him to say it by himself. Let's please give a warm welcome to Raul de Lima.
How you doing, Raul?
Hi, very well, Lord. How are you? Are you well?
Great,
Good.
man.
Take us back to your background. Where were you born?
So I was born in Johannesburg. In fact, my parents were immigrants to South Africa from Portugal. They met in South Africa, and in the early years of 60, late 50s and early years of 60, there was an initiative and an incentive for immigrants to come to South Africa. My dad was an artisan, and he was looking for better prospects, and boarded a ship in Lisbon, and came across to South Africa by ship, landed in Cape Town, arrived in Johannesburg with a suitcase.
Yeah.
Couldn't speak the language. Had one address in Joburg where there was a contact. In those days, they used to correspond by letter. There was no facsimiles, there was no emails, there was no SMSs. So you wrote a letter, you waited for 3 months to get a reply, and that's how people corresponded. And I'm probably reminding the youth that are so accustomed to new technology that there was a system of communication back then. So nonetheless, he arrived here. He met up with my mom, also an immigrant. And they lived in Jeppe, close to Jeppe Station, not far from here, for probably about 6 months. My mom fell pregnant. I was born at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in just down the other side of Hillbrow, going towards Parktown. And then they moved to Orange Grove. So for all intents and purposes, I was brought up in the suburbs within probably about 5 or 10 kilometers from here, from where we are actually now, which is the Troyvile Hotel. So that's when I was born. Born to immigrants, but very much born South African.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So basically, you're a South African.
I'm a South African at heart.
Okay. Then tell us, how was it growing up in SA? You personally, what were you dabbling in? Were you a naughty guy?
Yes, I suppose I was. Within reason. So I went to primary school in Linksfield. Then my dad was obviously, as I said, an artisan, and he came with nothing, but he managed to, find gainful employment. And he obviously also, being in construction, had an ability to rehabilitate buildings. So my dad's accumulation of wealth was through buying property, repairing it, fixing it, and then selling it on. And from those proceeds and those profits, reinvest in another property. So we must have moved about 15 or 16 times in my 18 odd years before I went to military service. And very early on, being part of a family who was obviously very involved in its own self-sustainability in terms of obviously generating its own sort of wealth, so to speak, got very involved from a very young age. I remember I used to be 6 years old, and on a Saturday morning, my dad would have a number of individuals helping mix concrete pour, and I would stand in the middle in the freezing winter with a hose pipe pouring water into a concrete mix while they mixed it. And I think if I put too much water, I'd get a little clip around the ear hole because I was wasting the cement away. Or if I was putting too little and it was very dry mix and making it hard for the guys to mix, I'd get another clip. But very early on, I got immersed and became educated in obviously construction methods. Because of my dad's teachings and accompanying the journey that my dad followed in terms of buying an older home and repairing it, fixing it up, and then being able to on-sell it for a profit and then reinvesting those earnings back into another one. And so we moved multiple times. And we lived with dust and upheaval. My mom used to complain often. She used to complain about the fact that the house was never able to be maintained in a clean state because every other weekend there was construction taking place, So those were some of the frustrations, of growing up, not being able to play football in the street, certainly in my earlier years, because most of my friends, and in that upbringing, you'll appreciate that we used to, our playground was in the streets. We used to kick a ball around in the streets, play soccer in the streets. If a car came up the road, we'd pick up the ball, move on to the pavement, and then set up goals again and play in the street. So that was kind of my upbringing.
Wow. I relate a lot to what you're saying. And then, what are the key lessons you learned in your father's property business?
So the necessity to make do with limited resources. Obviously, use yourself as a means to an end. Deploy yourself. In other words, use your hands and your head, and it was a fairly bit of hardship, getting up early in the morning. There was no such thing as getting up at 9 and lying in and relaxing. You'd get up early on the weekends or during the school holidays, and you had tasks that you had to do. And my dad, from a very young age, obviously both with myself and my siblings, was one of those individuals that made us participate. It was very reliant on us making a contribution. So we always had tasks to do. Whether it was cleaning bricks or moving piles of debris from one side to another, pushing a wheelbarrow around, that kind of stuff. They were all consistent with obviously our age at the time, but nonetheless, they were tasks nonetheless, and so it taught me discipline. It taught me that you needed to be self-reliant and that you had to invest of yourself to get something done and not expect others to do it for you. So those were some of the intrinsics and some of the values that were instilled in me as a young individual.
Wow, that's a very good, solid background to build a business person. So after school, what happened to you? What did you do?
So after school, obviously, and again, coming back to my upbringing, we were 4 siblings, and my parents, obviously, worked damn hard to put us through school and education. So after school, I then joined technical college. Okay. And because of my interest in building, it kind of steered me in a direction of design. So I immersed myself into actual technical drawing and design. And that's where I started my kind of career in terms of becoming an apprentice on a drawing board and working for businesses where design was required. So initially it was construction design, and then it moved into interior design. It moved into the design of creating shop fitting equipment for retail. I also got involved in some structural design, which was to do with timber engineering and timber housing. But I was pretty much an individual that didn't really particularly like going to school a lot. But I was certainly an individual that picked up a lot of things, and obviously through the apprenticeship that I underwent, gained an extreme amount of knowledge in terms of being able to see visually things in 3 dimensions, and to be able to conceptualize and to be able to design what it was that needed to be designed for somebody to interpret, and then for them to then go and execute and manufacture, so to speak. And then I also became hugely interested in creativity. And so I was able to visualize certain things in a 3-dimensional space and be able to go walk away and go and design something. And that's what I then started incorporating into my career very early on.
Okay. So from there, after you did that, what happened? Where did you go and what did you do?
So as a young individual, obviously worked for a couple of businesses. 2-3 years in 2 or 3 businesses, not many more than that. And then I think at the age of 27, I was introduced to a fantastic individual by the name of Robert Brosen, who was the founder or the co-founder of the Nando's Group. And at the age of 27, I joined the Nando's Group in a design and development capacity. And what that really entailed was getting involved with Nando's, which was a fledgling business, in terms of assisting property to identify locations. Obviously, the locations needed to be viable in terms of business prospects. I was very naive about that. I was actually very green to understand, what constituted a great site and what would make a great site work. But nevertheless, from a construction point of view, from a rehabilitation of the premises or the space, I would accompany the property individuals with that. And then I would be responsible for the design, the project management and the rollout, almost in a turnkey kind of arrangement, by culminating in handing over the keys to the operator. So almost a one-stop shop in terms of taking a retail space, transforming it to become consistent with what the brand required from end to end, and then to the point where you hand over the keys to an operator to start operating. And that's what I did in my early years in South Africa. From there on, obviously, Nando's was an environment which was an environment that I strived in a great deal, principally because I was very close to the originators and the founders of the brand. I was very much part of a small business that was obviously growing and growing exponentially. I was part of a business which started with a handful of people, but over a very short space of time started employing a lot of individuals to make it what it is today. But along that journey, the transformation of small business into medium business into larger business. And what happened was at the time with Nando's is that, interestingly enough, and I think, Robbie and Fernando will attest to the fact that, we all had a lot of heart and we all had a lot of passion. Whether we were smart enough, all of us were smart enough, and they were certainly smarter than I was, to be able to really, strategize and define business in terms of where it had to go. There was certainly a vision, but not necessarily a plan, so to speak, or a concrete plan. So we made quite a lot of errors along the way, and we were a little bit shotgun, in terms of our approach, and also a little bit maverick, and somewhat sometimes a little bit disjointed. But nonetheless, because of the heart and the passion that we all had, we certainly, went on to make that business successful at the time, and even more successful than what it is today. I left many years ago, but the fact of the matter is that it also gave you scope. An individual that immersed himself in a brand like that, there was an ability to be able to grow individually as well as grow with the business. And I think because of my involvement, my passion, obviously the work that I put in, the effort that I put in, the hours that I put in, that was very soon understood by management, senior management, by the executives. And because we were a growing business, it allowed me to grow as an individual, by building small divisions and small departments within the brand, finding people that were better than I was at doing what was it needed to be done, freeing me up to move on to the next project or into another stream of business where ordinarily I wasn't qualified, But because of this richness and this ability to learn, I found myself pretty soon after having joined Nando's, within 3 or 4 years, started to travel abroad. And I traveled abroad extensively for probably about 15 consecutive years, starting to set up Nando's all over the world. And I think at the time when I left Nando's in 2010, I think we had established Nando's in some 30 odd countries. And there was not one single country that I hadn't been to, where Nando's didn't exist. So I was very much part of growing the Nando's brand, in those foreign markets. And that in itself, is hugely educational. You can't, there's no investment that can buy, firstly, the cost of the travel to all these markets, the accommodation, the flights, and all the on expenses, but also, the ability to get to know different cultures, experience new cities, different environments, and then working with people in all those markets where you synergize and you take a homegrown South African business and a brand and start evangelizing that business and that brand to people that not necessarily are or familiar with what your brand's requirements are. And so in there was this passing on of a huge amount of brand information and brand IP to other individuals on the ground for them to interpret and for them to then move on and grow the business within their own, within their own environments, but with a common thread back to mother brand in South Africa. So that really was my journey until probably, my late 40s, I wouldn't say late 40s, but probably, yes, actually mid 40s to late 40s.
So what did you specifically enjoy about the whole traveling in those different countries and establishing those franchises?
I think the biggest thing was to the excitement that goes with traveling to a new foreign destination, and never having been there, the anticipation of what you would find there, what would you see. And I traveled to both first world cities across the globe, but I also traveled into many countries in Africa. And so I got to see first world and third world, but for me, the anticipation, the excitement, the kind of dreaming that I had in my head about what I was going to find and expect, and what I could find and expect, that's what kind of really what I really enjoyed. Traveling is tiresome. You go on a holiday, you come back, and you need another holiday. Now when you're traveling consistently and you're living, with a suitcase in a hotel, traveling on a plane, getting into a train or onto a train or into a car or a taxi to get to your meetings and to go and network and work with individuals in all these territories, it's hugely taxing on you. But because you're young and you're excitable, that washed off. I never really ever felt tired, And then obviously experiencing cultures, experiencing people, and finding goodness in so many people, And I think there is this very important aspect, is that you quickly, if you're surrounded by good people, you quickly get to surround yourself and seek out other good people. And it's amazing how you can be from two very different continents, diverse cultures, and yet when you meet up and you have an introduction, you quickly start to read that individual, and you quickly find that you're able to enjoy a rapport with more individuals than not. So that for me was hugely beneficial and exciting as an individual, traveling to these destinations. And I found it hugely rewarding as well, and so educational and so informative.
You talked about in the early days of Nando's, you guys made a lot of mistakes. What was the biggest mistake that happened and you still remember it up to this day?
I think we were exuberant. I had mentioned that we were a little bit maverick. Sometimes we didn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's. We had an adventurous and entrepreneurial kind of disposition, so to speak. So what would happen is that often we didn't think through everything. We're more with heart and passion than head. So if you can understand what I'm saying. So what happens is, when you don't think things through properly, and you don't have a scenario A, B, C, and D, you often go just with A. And then you end up in a situation which is not where you envisaged you would find yourself in. And then pretty quickly you got to go and start finding a plan B, but you learn from those things. And I think it's rich in anybody's development of their career path, is the ability to be able to make some mistakes, be allowed the space to make some mistakes, and then to be able to be supported in rectifying those mistakes, learning from them, and moving on. Too often, and I think there's very few people in life that have become hugely successful without making mistakes. And then I think too often people make mistakes and they're not allowed the ability to rectify the mistakes by being supported. So what happens is you get knocked down. And that can be hugely discouraging, because then what happens is when you get constantly getting knocked down when you're making mistakes, you're not able to overcome And so what happens is you start withdrawing and you start moving away from a realm of responsibility in terms of taking on, accountability for whether it's a project, a task, or even, a portion of a business. So I think those are some of the lessons that one gets to learn.
Okay. Do you have a specific story in mind of such mistakes or such lessons?
I think if anything, because we were very entrepreneurial, we perhaps didn't look at focusing in one particular area, geographically. So we kind of went a bit shotgun, not understanding some of those dynamics and all the on costs associated with being spread out. From a logistics point of view, from a resource point of view, and so what happens, you quickly start learning that, unless you're making super profits on the other side, it's taking away from the profits that you're making in one location. So that's probably the biggest thing stand out for me, is that often you take on too much and it's a bit too spread out. And if you don't have the financial capability and you don't have the human resources, and when I talk about human resources, I'm not only talking about people, numbers of people, I'm talking about great people in great positions, delivering great results, So often you find yourself wanting, and that can put a lot of burden and certainly a lot of pressure on any fledgling business that's looking to grow.
Okay. You've mentioned also something very interesting, that you met one of the co-founders of Nando's. What's the story? How did you guys meet?
So what happened was, and it's strange because obviously, in the world of business, you have friends and you have colleagues. And obviously, again, you get recognized for the efforts that you put in. And there was a particular individual called Selwyn who I worked with, who was a colleague of mine and became a friend of mine. And he moved on from the business that I was in, and he joined the Nando's group. And at a particular point in time when Nando's had a need to start growing the number of stores on the ground because they were going through an expansion program, that gentleman first thought of me, and he, in conversations at management level, I'm looking for resources to come on board to help, grow the business, in particular areas of the business. And so what happened was Selwyn made mention of my name to Robert Brosen, who was the founder of Nando's. And, there was a need in the business. And what happened was that, Robert invited me to go along, to meet up with him and to have a conversation around, a particular prospect that the business, had, which would potentially suit me and suit them if we came to an arrangement. Now, it wasn't a formal interview, and that's quite an interesting dynamic, because ordinarily you'd have to submit your CV and apply for a job, and then you'd be shortlisted, and then you'd then wait for an interview, and you go through maybe one round or two rounds and possibly a third round, and if you were successful, you got the job. Back then, it was we used to have that dynamic, but there was also instances where certain individuals were afforded, I suppose, because of their what they had contributed prior. And were recognized for perhaps what they had contributed prior, to be facilitated with an interview with somebody that was looking to employ somebody. Fortuitously, I met with Robert. We had a very informal conversation, and I think we connected. I don't think I would have joined Nando's if we hadn't, But it was through that intervention that I was afforded, the ability to join Nando's when it was still quite small, still family, very much a family business. And within a couple of months, I joined the team, and I had my work cut out. There were definitive aspects that I needed to deliver on, and that's how I got immersed.
Okay, and then from Nando's, where did you move on to?
So I was with Nando's for a long time, obviously, and as I say, every 2 or 3 years, I was afforded the ability to move into a different portfolio and head up a different portfolio. And again, it was off the back of building a team to fulfill the objectives of a particular function within the business, and leaving a solid team behind, better capable to execute than I was. So that facilitated my ability to move on and then be mentored and be developed and grown by new management in a different structure. So that's kind of how my growth path, my personal growth path, career-wise, came about. Is that I was I was able to move around into departments. So as I mentioned before, I was obviously involved in design and development, project management. I then moved into doing the same thing, but internationally. Okay. Pretty soon after that, because I became more immersed in the general aspects of the business and got to understand a lot more about the business holistically. You know, again, Nando's was one of those organizations that, you know, you weren't boxed into a particular function and that's all you focused on. You know, there was a huge interdependency amongst the various departments. And because it was quite flat in its structure from a hierarchy perspective, very flat, not a lot of tiers upon tiers of management, you networked very closely with people in human resources, finance, marketing, you know, PR, development, operations, you know, and obviously, you know, because of that proximity, if you were an individual that had an ability and a want and a will to get to learn more about business per se, you know, you were afforded that. And that's how I got to become pretty much a general manager, so to speak, in getting to understand how to run a business. But it was through that development affordability within 20 years of the Nando's group. And that's really what allowed me to, you know, to move on from there. In 2010, it was the year of the World Cup. You know, there was a strategic development that happened within the business. And again, this is something that I must bring up, is that businesses sometimes start up as a family business and they evolve. And what happens is just because you are exceptional or a big contributor and a valuable contributor within a business when it starts out, it doesn't mean that you'll be that same great individual 20 years hence. Because businesses evolve, you know, they require better management, better equipped people, more knowledgeable people. And so what happens is you have a lifespan, so to speak. You know, now I was afforded to be able to move within the business over 20 years into multiple disciplines. There were other individuals that joined at the same time as I did, and when I left 20 years later, they were still in the same position that were employed back then when I started. So they hadn't really, the business had grown and had developed. Those individuals had stayed within a particular division of the business, either because they wanted to or because maybe there weren't other prospects or maybe because they were comfortable. I can't answer for them. But all I know is that for me, I was afforded, you know, the ability to move multiple times. In 20 years, probably about 10 or 12 or 13 times that I moved portfolio. You know, and that's rich in terms of one's development. So in 2010, you know, came to a dawn where, you know, it was time to move on. There was a change of management. You know, the business had to evolve to another level. It was becoming a lot more corporate. You know, you couldn't be as maverick as you were before, you know. And so I knew myself, you know, it was time to move on. And also, not only that, you know, I'd been so inwardly focused within Nando's. The one thing about the Nando's story is that if you become immersed in Nando's, you become property of Nando's. You live, eat, sleep Nando's. You know what I mean? You are fully immersed in that brand. And you would very rarely, if you really felt hugely satisfied within yourself, within the organization that you worked in, and you were enriched, and they were with you, you'd find that you wouldn't be willingly looking for other work. If you understand what I'm saying. Often you get employed and, you know, and you're there for 6 months and you want to move on because there's no residence, you know, there's no passion, there's no chemistry, you know, and you can resonate with that in so many things with friends and even with spouses or partners in life. You know, sometimes you're restless and it's just not working out for you. But for me, it worked out. But it did come a time, you know, that you've got to let the young guard in. New people need to come in with a huge amount of experience. They are now geared for the next growth spurt of the business. And so I realized, you know, that it was time to move on. And so I did. I decided to move on. 2010, the year of the World Cup. It was around about September. And I basically moved on and I kind of decided that, you know, that I wanted some time to myself. I started a consultancy business. You know, I had learned enough about the hospitality and the food and beverage business, you know, to be able to impart knowledge to maybe people that needed that assistance. And so I started a consultancy business. I found a couple of customers and basically I started helping them out, you know, a couple of brands, a couple of individuals in business. And that's what I did for a couple of years. And then what happened was through that consultancy business, I was approached by Sun International. Again, through an introduction. okay, based on my bona fides historically. And they were looking to also go through some kind of transformation within Sun International. And I was approached as a consultant to go and do some work on their business, particularly food and beverage. A huge corporate business, obviously publicly listed on the stock exchange, hugely successful, combination of casinos, hotels, and then obviously a huge element or portfolio of food and beverage within the hospitality and casino space. Now, it had happened that over years prior to me joining them, they had outsourced all the food and beverage. You had mentioned earlier I was involved in, and I wasn't involved on my own. It was, I was part of a team that insourced food and beverage back into Sun International. But basically what I did is I went and did some due diligence on food and beverage operations within the group. They had all been outsourced to third-party companies. There was a bit of a disconnect between the brand Sun International and how the customer perceived Sun International and the service providers within the Sun International precincts in terms of the delivery to the customer. And that was in terms of price, experience, products. The things that generally, stand out in terms of whether food and beverage are good and exceptional to be mediocre and perceived to be expensive. So I spent a year basically, traveling throughout the length and breadth of Sun International. And in that year, obviously, managed to put together, my findings, which I then shared with the Sun International board. And a decision was taken by the board at the time that they would go ahead with re-insourcing food and beverage back into the group. So at the time, they then made me an offer, and they suggested that because I had immersed myself in doing the study, that I'd probably be best qualified to actually join the group full time to do the implementation of the changeover.
So the whole time you were still a consultant?
Still a consultant, but more and more immersed, with Sun International. Became almost a full-time consultancy position by virtue of the fact that, they had a lot of properties, a huge business, and it required a lot of traveling and a lot of displacement. So hence, I started letting my smaller customers know that I just didn't have, the capacity to help them out. So it was a transformational kind of journey. I didn't leave anybody in the lurch, but it afforded me the opportunity to get involved holistically within the Sun International business, getting to understand, again, many other nuances of the business. And again, it's all about a learning culture. I mean, I knew very little about casinos and how they were meant to operate. Hotels, the best I knew about hotels is that I was a very good customer of hotels. And I became a discerning one at that because I know what I expected in a hotel room when I visited a hotel room. Okay. But I didn't understand the nuances and how to run, hotels, arguably. I understood food and beverage and the dynamics of food and beverage. I also never expected to find a maze of corridors behind the scenes in all the passages that, ordinary guests never get to see. And I tell you what, there is a huge infrastructure that goes into these properties in terms of being the backbone to be able to, drive logistics, to customers that are, least suspecting of how a meal got to them, hypothetically. You know what I mean? So so these were again, huge learnings. Again, a will and a want and an excitement about traveling, getting to meet people, getting to learn a lot of things. And then obviously being afforded the ability to go through an implementation project of insourcing food and beverage back into Sun International, which I then duly did. And then fortuitously, again, off the back of that, Sun City was going through a transformation. And, I was offered or asked, to contemplate maybe going to run Sun City in its entirety. They were looking to invest a fortune of money into the Sun City, resort, and at the same time, didn't only require transformation in terms of bricks and mortar, and lots of changes in the actual environment that customers are accustomed to, but also required change in structure. Obviously, a huge amount of work within the culture and the people. And obviously they found that I'd probably be the individual at the right time to go and assist with that. And yeah, I discussed with my wife. It required me relocating to Sun City. But because I was so accustomed to traveling a lot, it wasn't that I was, going to be away from Joburg. And on top of it, I mean, there were always meetings in Joburg. I could always come for the weekend if I needed to. And the nice thing about being involved in Sun City, you could get your family to come and visit you more often, But being involved at Sun City, required a lot of energy, both physically and mentally. You know what I mean? And it was hugely interesting. It was hugely rewarding. It was also hugely educational because I'd never experienced, a project and a resort of that magnitude. But very rewarding. I thoroughly enjoyed all my time there. And then obviously ahead of COVID, I then moved away from Sun City back to Joburg because I had spent close to 5 years there.
Okay, when you're working in Sun City, you said it was hugely educational. What were the most valuable things that you learned?
So obviously being the head of a business like that, I had about 12 executives reporting into me, senior executives. They were all important. They were all responsible for a particular portfolio within the business. Okay. So it was working with those individuals at a very high level, strategic level. But then obviously going through the various layers right down to an individual that was probably just doing menial work like cleaning, for argument's sake. So getting to know those people, walking into kitchens, meeting with the gardeners, there was just so many people. I think at the time Sun City employed something like 3,000 permanent employees and another 2,500 contracted employees, through service providers. So it was housekeeping. There was obviously food and beverage, there was gardening, there was maintenance, engineering, there were the hotels, conferencing, vacation club. So that was within the resort. Then outside the resort, there was obviously the local municipality, Moses Kotane municipality. There were the local chiefdoms. There were chiefs, local chiefs that had precincts around the resort. There was business around the resort. There were neighboring properties that catered to tourists within close proximity. So it required involvement, not only within the actual business itself, but connection back to the head office and other Sun International properties. And then similarly, you had to afford time to get involved with local communities and get to understand some of the dynamics and some of the things that are affecting local communities. Because by far and large, Sun City is in a bit of a remote location. It's not urban, it's rural. And there's a lot of factors that came into play in terms of the well-being of the communities surrounding Sun City. A lot of them were dependent first and foremost on Sun City to provide employment. They were also reliant on some of the infrastructure that Sun City had. So, and also, the interesting thing about those communities, a lot of them didn't see eye to eye. Each chief that looked after a particular tribe or a particular, territory, worried about, his own dependence and his own community. Didn't necessarily mean that he understood or he agreed with what was happening not too far down the road from him. And there was often quite a bit of conflict, Unemployment creates conflict. It provides a burden. There's poverty. There's obviously lack of infrastructure, and so often those communities and those chiefs and the local municipality would look to Sun City to almost be the protagonist of finding resolutions to assist, with their well-being. So that was hugely educational. I'd never worked with those communities. I'd also never worked with a trade union, and Sun City, had a recognized trade union, and the trade union was heavily involved in business. They were representatives of the employees. So, you had to work with the trade union, I'd never worked with that. So that was a huge learning to get to understand and sit down and see viewpoints from the other side, representatives of your employees, both the good and the bad. The fact that some employees were disgruntled and perhaps weren't being looked after the way they should by corporate business, The one thing I did find though, and that I was able to impart from my Nando's years, was that one thing that we learned to know at Nando's and we used to live by is that we respected everybody that worked within the Nando's brand, irrespective of their, their upbringing, their social standing, their race and their gender. And everybody was important, aspect of the Nando's brand. For as long as you wore a Nando's shirt, you were a respected member of our business and our brand. And that taught me to be humble and to be able to relate to people right down the pecking order. So very quickly, people got to know who I was, and I got to know who they were. Now, it's difficult to recognize 3,000 employees and know them all, get to know them all, and even remember their names, So you relied on name badges. Some of them you got to know because obviously you interact with them a lot more. And sometimes there was change, and all of a sudden there was a new person with a new name badge you never seen them before. But I used to connect with them. I used to resonate with them, and I used to have gatherings of employees to understand some of the issues that affected them. So we started building a sense of community and rapport, and we wanted to change the culture within as well, and get them to understand that they were respected and valued for the service that they gave. There's an important mantra in business is that happy staff equals happy customer equals happy bank manager. Are you with me? So you got to make sure that if you want your staff, your customers to be happy, your staff need to be happy. They've got to treat your customers with respect and with dignity and with passion and with pride. You know what I mean? Doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes, but again, it's how you develop them and how you look after them. And that's how you get a happy customer. Happy customer brings in more business. More business makes your bank manager happy. So it's a very simple equation. But I mean, those were some of the fundamentals that we had to deal with, in terms of getting people to understand they are an important aspect of the business. And in order to get them to deliver to the best of their ability, you needed to know what affected them. Often we only worry about our staff when they're at the workplace. You forget that sometimes they've got to commute 3 hours, get up early hours of the morning. They might be living in a shack. They might have had a flood the night before. There might have been a fire that affected their well-being, or they didn't get much sleep. Now they come to work, and you expect them to be at the top of their game. You don't know where they're coming from. You know what I mean? So within Nando's, that was also an important part of our education, is that we cared about our people, and if somebody was in difficulties, we tried to find the best way to assist them and alleviate some of those difficulties. Because people are important. In any business, people are important. They're probably your most valuable assets. So I was able to, as I say, to kind of immerse myself within the people of Sun City, and they got to know me by name. They started calling me Raul instead of Mr. or Sir. Some of them you couldn't get away from, because their education was always to respect, somebody, and you had to call them by their title, But a lot of them started calling me Raul. They got to know me as Raul, and I was fine with that, It was a beautiful journey to be able to leave, with so many people recognizing who you are and having got to know who you were, and hoping that you left a mark and you had made a difference within their lives and within the business's, prosperity. So that's what I found most enjoyable, and certainly, I took a lot of learnings from that.
Okay, I like what you said. When you talk, especially when you talk about people, it reminded me to ask you, what do you think makes a great leader?
So I think the difference between a manager and a leader is that I think a leader has obviously the ability to lead. What does that mean? That means that a leader is able to interpret a task or a project, okay, and is able to quickly define or align himself with what needs to be done and what kind of resources one needs, okay, and to understand that you are reliant on resources to help you, deliver on what that task or project requires. Doesn't mean that you need to be the best individual. Doesn't mean that you need to be a know-all. But it's an individual that can interpret weaknesses, strengths, dynamics, and is able to bring a few people together and build a team to help deliver and execute to the desired standard. Now, a lot of people find themselves as managers, and what managers do is they just tell people what to do. And unfortunately, when they're not there, people don't know what to do because they're not being told. A leader doesn't have to tell people what to do. A leader is able to put a package together that outlines what it needs to be done and some of the tactics and some of the plans and some of the resources that are required to be able to deliver. Okay, but allows those individuals to be able to be contributes and to actually take the project on and deliver on the project. Very different to managing people. So I think that's the two clear distinctions between being a leader and being a manager.
Okay. So what would you advise a young man like me to do in order to become a greater leader and a greater manager? Simple things that I can just implement or practice.
So I think, and again, I think one can't generalize. I think some people are either born to lead and some people aren't. I think that depends on your upbringing, okay, and the circumstances that you've been brought up in. And but I do believe that inherently most people, can develop themselves into leaders. They've got to be afforded, that in terms of their development. I think, and again, I'll allude to the fact that if you are an individual that wants to make a difference and wants to see improvement or wants to take something and build on it, okay, you already exhibit an element of leadership. Okay, you might not be able to have the knowledge, okay, and the wherewith to be able to take it from there, but at least you have a thought. You might be able to package a vision. And then what you're then able to do then is start working out what do you actually need to be able to deliver on that. All right. Whether it's resources, equipment, tools, personnel, maybe funds, So what a leader inherently then does is that he's then able to go out and put together the package and try and engage and network with other individuals that are able to interpret what it is that his task is or his project is, and try and get them to co-opt in. Okay. People that already have a proven track record and are influential are able to do that quite easily because they have reliance, they've got credibility, they are respected for what they've achieved in their past, and you're only as good as your last project, believe it or not, and the delivery of your last project. So generally speaking, you get different levels of leadership. Okay. I also alluded to earlier, somebody that's great at being a leader at an embryonic stage of business, thumbs up. But they might not be great leaders to take it to another level. You need a different dynamic individual. But surround yourself with influential people. Surround yourself with positive people. Surround yourself with people that give you objective reviews and constructive criticism. Interpret that. Look at yourself in the mirror. Okay, and a lot of leadership and leadership development comes from within. Don't become arrogant. Don't use people to achieve your objective. Don't undermine people. Don't exploit people. Rather, surround yourself with people. Recognize the talents of people. Help grow those people, and that's the true hallmark of a great leader, is to be able to do that. Now, you can go to university and you can study leadership, and you can do all the theory. But if you're not able to find yourself in an environment that allows you to do that or encourages you to do that, you find that you're not able to practice that. And it comes from a lot of experience, And sometimes great leaders fail, and great leaders fall by the wayside. But what happens is that the people that you've developed and the people that you've surrounded yourself with within groups and within teams recognize that you're not quite who you are. And they are the same true people that come to your rescue and inject a new amount of life into you. And they provide you with inspiration. They provide you with getting you through some difficult times. Because all people through all walks of life, it doesn't matter what your status is and what your social holding is that people go through difficult times. We often forget that. We're not infallible. So those are some of the attributes that anybody that has leadership qualities should be looking into.
Okay. When you talk about difficult times, you remind me of a popular question we like to ask on the show. What was the most difficult day at work for you?
Too many to mention.
The biggest one, what happened there? You woke up and then what happened?
Jeez. You get those days when everything goes wrong. Your world's crumbling, you're falling apart, you don't think you can come out of it. And I think there were a lot of those days. I think probably the most significant one was, sometimes being isolated, sometimes negative mindsets, forgetting that there are people that you can trust and you can talk to, and I think often, and I know with me, maybe it's a bit of a Calvinistic kind of upbringing, but sometimes, you don't share your emotions, some of us try and just keep it all in, and sometimes it's got to come out, I found myself at a particular time when I lived in Australia for a while, almost becoming isolated, being immersed in work, maybe not socializing enough. And when things don't go right, and not everything's going right and going well, you start becoming a little bit insular, talking to people about your frustrations and, and your hurt that you're going through. And I remember a point in time where I just wanted to get back on a plane and come back to South Africa. And I eventually did. I just went through a lot more hardship before I could come back. And I think for me, the hardest was actually leaving, and leaving with almost a sense of like half-felt failure. I didn't quite see the full project through, if you understand what I'm saying. I'm often an individual that thrives on taking on projects and delivering them and moving on to the next one. And sometimes when you don't complete a project, you can take it, and you look at yourself critically, you can take it on board as kind of having failed, so to speak. And that can weigh you down, you forget it, you forget to eat, you forget to drink, you forget to sleep, you develop insomnia, you harbor all these inner feelings and you're not able to, dispose of them. Fortuitously, I came back to South Africa, and again, the great people that I'd surrounded myself with over many years, they they get this inkling that not everything's right, but you start socializing with the kids, they don't kind of intrude into your inner space, but they start understanding, and through conversations you start healing, and you become yourself again, and through some of those things you even become even better. And sometimes you've got to go through setbacks. It's almost like a self-adjustment that you've got to go through, a bit of sacrifice, a bit of hardship, just to ground you a bit, and it also builds more resilience and strength within you, and it helps you to then move on to another level.
Now I hear you, Raul. You did the opposite. You wanted to leave Australia and come back to South Africa. So that's the opposite. Then moving forward, how did you, what happened when you moved from Sun International to here? Okay,
so I had been at Sun International, and in particular at Sun City. And, I missed Joburg quite a bit. You become a bit insular there as well. Almost becomes like that you're on a little island, you become immersed in your surroundings, you know what I mean? That became my community, that became my life. And my family were in Joburg, and I had spent enough time there, and I felt that, I was also getting on a little bit older, and I felt that I wanted to come to Joburg, and so I actually resigned from Sun International. And I came, that was around about the middle of 2019. 6 months hence, I was working with a couple of individuals that were friends of mine, doing a bit of work, also looking at potentially growing a business and making some acquisitions. And 6 months is hardly a long time within a business like that to really make a fundamental difference. You only start learning the fundamentals of a new business, within 6 months. You start, it takes time to get to know the nuances, etc. But then what happened was, at the onset of 2020, early 2020, you'll remember that COVID came along. And all of a sudden, everything came to a pedestrian, existence. Everything's almost came to a halt, And so I found myself at home and trying to understand and try and fathom, the effects of COVID. None of us had an understanding of where COVID would go to. We thought it was probably the end of the world. We didn't understand how long we'd be in isolation for, and we'd had to stay at home for. We didn't understand what the end game was going to be. Having said that, you quickly need to kind of work out how you're going to exist. You don't have income coming in, you've got a family to look after, you're staying at home, you're not working, you're not socializing, you become insular again. But I started doing a lot of research on the net and felt that, I'm going to have to probably go into business of my own. And started looking at a lot of businesses. Now, unfortunately, a lot of businesses started closing down. They didn't have the capability to see through COVID. And very quickly on, within the first month or two of COVID, businesses actually shut down because they had no cash flow. You know, they had rents to pay, they had staff to pay, they had to buy product, they couldn't move product, they had debtors, they had creditors, you know, and there's no cash. And so they were forced to go into liquidation. Particularly restaurants were hard hit, any places of entertainment, etc. A lot of new emerging businesses were coming along with the advent of sanitizers and masks. It's amazing how many of those businesses grew trying to sell sanitizer and masks, you know, to try and find a means to income, you know. They say one man's need is another man's opportunity. So there were a lot of those businesses, and I was looking at businesses. I didn't have a lot of cash. I also needed to preserve some of my investments. And I started looking at a lot of businesses, and when we started getting it around, I had a permit in terms of my business to be able to get around, and that was through the consultancy business. I did a little bit of consultancy. And at the same time, I was looking at prospects. I looked at petrol stations. I looked at restaurants. I didn't want to invest in a business that I had no huge understanding of. I wouldn't have gone into chemicals or anything else, you know. But something that was aligned to retail and easy retail, I was willing to look at. And during that discovery, obviously networked with Robert Brosen again. You know, Nando's headquarters are just down the road here. Nando's happened to have a bit of an interest in this property. This property was going through the struggles, through COVID. And Robert suggested that I come and have a look at this property and look at the prospects. And I obviously came to have a look at it. Again, I didn't know the nooks and the crannies behind it. I'd only ever come here as a customer. But because I came to look at the business, I then managed to get through all the corridors, the basement, all the corridors behind the scenes. Went through the building top to tail, got to look at the business model. And I kind of quickly discovered that, this was like a gem that, almost like a rough diamond with a bit of layer of dust over it, and that it had prospects. And we were deep in COVID, and we started having conversations, myself, Robert, and Fernando, who were the co-founders of Nando's. And we kind of, looked at the prospects of this and the potential, and quickly worked out that it had potential, but it would require an investment. And we quickly came to terms with, investing here and getting involved. And during the advent of COVID, we actually started repairing the place. So this property went through a huge refurbishment program. We did it during COVID, obviously not in the hard days of lockdown and isolation, but when they had freed up some of the curfew times and the ability for businesses to get back into business, we started rehabilitating. I used a lot of people from within the community to help fix this place. And we used the months of COVID to fix and transform the Troyvile Hotel, which in itself is iconic property, having been built in the early 1900s. 1938 was the year that this property was built.
Oh.
It had gone through quite a few iterations of development, but it's been standing here. And it's center to a lot of communities, all these communities that we find within, and suburbs that we find within 10 or 15 kilometers of this particular precinct. Also, networking place for many people to come and network and socialize. So in the early days of Bonnie Bonato, when they were speculating for gold on the reef, they would meet here. Then afterwards into the 50s and the 60s. In the 50s, a lot of Jewish families resided in the area. A lot of these properties that you find here were properties that were developed by the Jewish community. They used to reside here. There were synagogues, there were shuls. They lived in the area, they congregated in the area, and they would come here. They then started moving out towards Houghton, northern suburbs, east, towards the east. And then the Portuguese, the early immigrants from Portugal, came to start residing here. They took over from the Jewish community. They were here throughout the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. Then into the 90s, the Portuguese community started moving out, also further afield. And then you started getting immigrants from from Africa, sort of moving into the area. Principally Mozambique, the DRC, the Congo, Zambia, Nigerians, etc. They started moving into the area. But this has always been a networking environment, and the hotel is centered to that. This is where people would come and meet and congregate and look at work prospects, look at, if there's any work going, any business to be done. And this is where they would congregate and share ideas and anecdotes and, and have a couple of drinks, talk over business, and then go home.
Okay. And then how has it been for you running the business?
It's been hugely exciting, again, hugely rewarding, taking a place that was like, in a derelict state, cleaning it up, transforming it, bringing back community. And fortuitously, we're like sort of on the wrong side of the tracks where we are close to Maboneng, but it's also become a melting pot for people to come from all far and wide Gauteng and actually come and visit. So we get people coming from Pretoria, Krugersdorp, Witbank. We get a lot of people that come to actually have a meal and enjoy a glass of wine or a drink at the Troyvile Hotel and socialize. And the interesting thing is that you often find 3 or 4 generations of people coming here where they come back and almost, and recount their upbringing. The grandparents would have lived in the area, and they'll stand on the rooftop and they'll point in a particular direction. They'll say, we grew up in that street, or we lived just down the road here. So you often hear those anecdotes where people are sharing, the fact that their parents lived in the area, or their grandparents, and now they're here. And then they also bring their children, and they actually share, stories about their past. So it's an environment that's conducive, for storytelling.
So now, what are your current challenges with this business currently?
So obviously, the challenges is within the area that we exist. If you travel a couple of kilometers in different directions, you'll find different communities. You'll find different states of decay. Some of the areas are still fairly intact. But as you move towards west into the inner city, you'll find that obviously the inner city is found wanting. Municipal services are non-existent. The delivery of services are non-existent. Refuse removal and collection, is really not there. Lack of infrastructure, leaking taps, electricity shortages, obviously notwithstanding what's happening with load shedding, but beyond load shedding, old infrastructure. And those are the challenges that one finds. When you invest in a precinct like this, is that you are obviously in the hands of the close proximity of the environment that you operate in. Now, we've gone far and large to elicit and to work with community. I belong to a couple of forums myself. And basically, we look at security, we look at cleanliness, we look at dealing with infrastructure. We network quite closely with Joburg City Power, with the municipality, and other working groups to try and alleviate some of the challenges that this neighborhood, finds itself in. We obviously help with impoverished communities. We try and lend a hand. Any remedial equipment that we've got left over that's surplus to our needs, we obviously try and donate. We donate meals. So there's a lot of projects that we're involved in, and obviously there's a greater move to doing a lot more within the community. But you become reliant on small businesses around you to help become the catalyst and effect change. And hopefully that has a bigger and more positive spin on, and starts, broadening its parameters into a wider circumference, around the area that we find ourselves in.
Okay, and then in closing, why should people come to the Troyvile Hotel?
People should come here because they'll find a bit of yesteryear. It's an environment that's easygoing. You've got great food, great service. It's an environment that you can sit down and relax. You can tell stories. You can be a bit louder than ordinarily you would be, let's say, in a more sophisticated restaurant or facility. And you're able to just enjoy a bit of a relaxation in an area which is probably on the wrong side of town, but it is rich in culture and in history. And you can go back and boast to your friends, which often does, that you found a little gem in the Troyvile Hotel. You didn't know it existed, but it exists, and it's here to stay, and we are committed to building around it. But it's a nice little gem that a lot of people resonate with, and that's the reason why you should come. And the other reason you should come is that you should come and experience life, maybe a little bit away from where you feel hugely comfortable, a little bit more cutting edge. There's virtually no crime Of that you can be certain. Yes, you might find a little bit intimidated trying to get here through the various corridors, but I can tell you now, I travel those corridors every day. Whether I come on Albertina Sisulu or I come on Joe Slovo all the way through Berea and past Ponty and then down into Judas Paul and Bertram's. I also come from the inner city. I go into the inner city often, and whilst maybe there's a bit of urban decay and lack of hygiene and cleanliness, you'll find that generally it's an environment that is safe. I'm not saying that one be in danger if you go into a dark little alley and you find yourself in the wrong place, but by far and large, I find myself very comfortable within the 15-kilometer radius of where we are located, and I have no hesitancy in traveling into town or into the nearing suburbs, because first and foremost, I haven't been affected, I haven't felt crime, I haven't been threatened, and I feel fairly comfortable.
Okay. And why should people go to Casa das Natas?
Casa das Natas is another little project that we have. We wanted to bring a bit of authenticity to South Africa. The Portuguese custard tart is a known treat for most international people, principally Portuguese people who grew up in Portugal and in Lisbon, more so. And we thought that we wanted to do justice to that product, and so we brought out a chef. He taught us how to make an authentic nata. We obviously have built 3 stores. We have another store that's going to be opening quite shortly. We have a production facility for wholesale, and again, it's a means of investing in business to stimulate and provide employment for people, enjoyment for customers, and hopefully turn a buck and make a return.
Nice. And then to the people watching, what's your one ultimate piece of advice, practical advice, that they can instantly do now to make themselves a better entrepreneur or a great business person?
So I think network, meet up with people, talk to a diverse number of people. You'll quickly realize people that are able to make a contribution, but also don't neglect people that don't. Having said that, you'll quickly work out who are positive people. Try and stay away from negative people, but have people that can be honest and blatant with you and share ideas, and don't be worried about people criticizing your ideas or giving you food for thought in terms of the things that you might not have thought of within the project or the business that you want to go into. Okay. Remember, you need to be successful, you need to have people that can assist you. Okay. You need people that can network with you, people that can put you in touch with other resources that ordinarily you wouldn't have access to. Have tenacity. Go the extra mile. Put in time and effort. And don't be scared of failure. Obviously, don't be reckless with your money. Try and be reasonable. Try and understand the risk associated with whatever it is that you're going to get involved in. Try and minimize that risk, but be prepared to lose a bit of money. Be prepared to fail. Again, through that, you will learn. You'll quickly realize that you won't make the same mistake a second time. And if you do, you probably won't make it a third time. But that's my advice to people. Be tenacious, be courageous, be adventurous.
Guys, you heard it all. Be tenacious, network, and be adventurous. There's a lot to say, and be brave. We can go for days, but Raul is a busy man. He has things to do. Maybe we will have him on the second episode. Who knows? But other than that, Raul, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and for making the time to come and let me tell my story.
Exactly.
I appreciate it immensely.
Yes, we love stories. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Raul de Lima, and thank you for your time. Take care.
Thank you.